In 1851, Henry Stevens Randall came to Monticello trying to gather information for a biography he was writing on Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, agreed to meet with him and gave him an interview and a tour of Monticello. At one point during the tour, he asked if he had heard the rumors about Hemings. Randolph said there's truth to these rumors. As anyone who'd ever met Sally Hemings' children could note, they had a strong resemblance to Jefferson. He said he would tell Mr. Randall a deep family secret as long as he agreed not to publish that secret. The reason her children appear to be related to Thomas Jefferson was that they are. Jefferson's nephew, Peter Carr, he said, had had a long affair with Hemings, fathering all of her children. This he did not want to print because it would be a shame to the Jefferson family, but he did want the historical record to note that it was not Thomas Jefferson and that he was only protecting his nephew. Randolph told Randall he could share this information privately as he saw fit, but he did not want to see it in print. Randolph went on to say that his mother, Martha Jefferson, Jefferson's daughter, was so concerned about his legacy being tarnished by this horrible act by Peter Carr that she pointed out to him on her deathbed that in the farm books it indicated Jefferson was gone for 15 months during a time when Sally Hemings became pregnant, indicating he clearly could not have been the father. This explained why Hemings and her children were treated differently than other slaves at Monticello, and why they were freed on his death. They were family. And so Randall's 3-volume work on Jefferson only included a passing reference to Hemings and did not make any reference to Peter Carr. In 1862, Edmund Bacon, who was formerly an overseer at the Monticello estate, further confirmed this, indicating that he had often seen Peter Carr coming out of Sally Hemings' room and that he was the father of all of the children. Despite all of this, because it wasn't in print, rumors continued to persist. James Parton, a popular biographer of the time, reached out to Mr. Randall to get more information about Jefferson, and Randall confided in him what he had been told. Parton at that time went ahead and published the information, excluding Mr. Carr's name. And for over 100 years, this was the generally accepted narrative. The Hemings children were of the Jefferson line, but they were not Thomas Jefferson's children, so they were Peter Carr's. There was only one problem. This isn't true. In 1998, a DNA study showed that neither Peter Carr nor his father could have been the father of Sally Hemings' oldest child, Eston. The evidence did, however, confirm that Eston was a Jefferson, specifically of the male line, indicating it would either have to be Thomas Jefferson, his brother, or his brother's sons. Jefferson's brother Randolph didn't live at Monticello, having his own plantation about a day's ride away. He was not at Monticello at the time of the conception, nor were any of his children. Jefferson, however, was. In fact, because of Jefferson's detailed notes, we know exactly when Jefferson was and wasn't at Monticello, and despite traveling quite frequently, Jefferson was consistently at Monticello at the time of each of Sally Hemings' conceptions. Jefferson's own notes contradicted Martha Jefferson's report that he was gone for 15 months. Jefferson was there. And the eyewitness report of the overseer? That gentleman only started working at Monticello in 1806, meaning he would only have been there for the conception of the very last child, who we now know was not a child of Peter Carr. So the accounts of Jefferson's family, his friends, do not hold up to historical scrutiny. They are clearly false. Peter Carr was not the father of Sally Hemings' children. There is, however, one account that does hold up to all historical scrutiny, that of Sally Hemings' son, Madison. Like Thomas Jefferson Randolph, Madison's account was not, of course, first-hand. It is what he was told by his mother. So let's begin with what we know about Sally Hemings. Sally was born in 1773. The exact date and month are not known, but it is generally accepted that she is the child of a slave owner by the name of John Wales. Wales was also the father of Martha Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's wife, meaning that Wales was Jefferson's father-in-law and Hemings was Martha Jefferson's half-sister. When Wales died, Martha Jefferson inherited Hemings as well as the rest of her family, and all came to Monticello. Sally was only a toddler at the time. In 1787, when she was just 14 years old, she was chosen by Jefferson's sister-in-law to accompany his youngest daughter Maria to France. Maria was only 9 at the time. Jefferson had come to France 2 years prior after being appointed minister to France. He had brought his oldest daughter, who was a year older than Sally, as well as Sally's older brother James. Madison Hemings stated that he was told by his mother that during this time she, and I quote, became Mr. Jefferson's concubine. He also stated that when Jefferson wanted to return home in 1789, Hemings initially refused, only agreeing to return home after negotiating extraordinary privileges for herself, as well as freedom for her future children. To put this in context, Jefferson's wife had died in 1784, when he was 39 years old and Sally Hemings was 9. When she arrived in Paris, Jefferson was 44 years old, and when they finally left, she was 16 and he was 46. But Sally and her brother both had unusual leverage in this situation, as France had outlawed slavery in 1789, meaning that they were both free as long as they remained in Paris. Jefferson was in fact paying them both wages at the time, and James was using those wages to pay for a grammar teacher to improve his French, which is not something he would do unless he was intending to stay in France. In fact, with his 3 years of culinary school and positive reputation as Jefferson's lead chef, he could have lived quite comfortably in Paris, had he stayed. But there were other considerations. 1789 was also the start of the French Revolution, making Paris a very dangerous city. And according to Madison, Sally Hemings was pregnant at the time she arrived in Virginia, which means it's possible she was pregnant when she was in Paris making these decisions and negotiations. We do know that on return to America, both James and Sally were given extraordinary privileges for slaves. James traveled with Jefferson to New York and to Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia he was paid wages equivalent to the free workers at the same location. James had so much leverage that in 1793 he was able to get Jefferson to put in writing that he would free James upon training of a replacement at Monticello. And in 1796, after spending 2 years training his brother Peter, who happened to be a master brewer, in the art of French cooking, James was granted his freedom by Jefferson. James was one of only two people that Jefferson formally granted freedom to during his lifetime. The other was Robert Hemings, James's brother, who had entered an agreement with a third party to take out a loan to purchase his own freedom, which Jefferson only granted on payment. Madison Hemings' account is that Sally Hemings' first child died shortly after birth, and no records were kept. Sally had at least 6 other children. Those children were all documented. 4 survived to adulthood. All 4 were either allowed to leave Monticello on their own volition when they turned 21, or were freed in Jefferson's will. For comparison, Sally's older sister Mary was leased out to a white man named Thomas Bell while Jefferson went to Paris. While with Thomas Bell, she had 2 children, and on Jefferson's return, she asked if she could be sold to Thomas Bell. Jefferson agreed to sell her and her 2 children to Thomas Bell, the 2 that she had had with Thomas Bell. However, 2 children that she had prior, 7 and 11 years old, Jefferson refused to sell. Jefferson had also previously given away 2 of her other children as wedding gifts for her children. In 1822, Sally Hemings' oldest surviving child, a son named Beverly, was 21 years of age. He was allowed to leave Monticello along with his 17-year-old sister Harriet. The reports are that Harriet was given $50, which is equivalent to $1,000 in modern times, and both were on a stage that went to Washington, D.C. According to Madison, both passed in white society as they were so light-skinned, married, and had been lost to history. When Thomas Jefferson died, his will stated that Sally Hemings' 2 other children, Madison and Eston, should be freed on their 21st birthday. Of the 130 slaves at Monticello, only 5 were freed in Jefferson's will: Madison, Eston, 2 of Sally Hemings' nephews, and her younger brother. Although never officially freed, Sally was, quote, given her time and allowed to move with her sons, Eston and Madison, to live in Charlottesville, where she lived until 1835 when she passed away at 62. Sadly, James's adventure was more tragic. After being freed, he likely traveled, although records are scant. Jefferson wrote to him several times asking him to return to work for him, including offering him an opportunity to be the White House chef. James declined over and over, until finally, in the summer of 1801, he agreed to come to Monticello one last time. Records indicate he was paid $30 to work there for the summer for 6 weeks, and then 2 months after he left, James took his own life in Baltimore. It's often said that in looking at these things, you must put them in historical context. Look at the times. But what does that really mean? In 100 years, will we look back at the Epstein Island and say, well, you have to consider rich people at the time could get away with such things? What does of the time really mean? We know from genetic records that this type of behavior was very common at the time. And what you can say to Jefferson's credit is, unlike most people of the time, he did seem to keep his word. His contract was binding. He did free his children. Does that speak well of Jefferson? Or how badly the world was at the time? History is awkward.